right, good evening, everybody. Oh, very robust. Excellent. I hope you had a good day. It was a beautiful day outside, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was great. Love. It's okay. You scared me. All right. Don't remember what I was going to say. That's probably good. All right. So, I need to give you a little warning as we get into our talk this evening. This is going to be some significant heavy lifting. And I'm going to ask you to think, right? So, of course, the theme for this week is willing, TLC willing, and I'm encouraging you to be willing to think. Do not be like so many of your generation who are timid, who will not get off the fence, who cannot make a decision, but dare to think. And so we are looking at this series that I'm calling Under Fire. And we're looking at the resistance nests of the enemy that want to keep us on the beach so that we cannot occupy until the Lord comes, as we are commanded to do. And the other day, actually yesterday, if my math is correct, sorry, yesterday we looked at that first resistance nest, and it's actually kind of an easy one. It's soft. The people that man it are standing there, and they're holding daisies in their hands, and they have coexist bumper stickers on their cars, and they're dabbing themselves in all kinds of essential oils and stuff, and they smell nice, and they're pretty, and they're like, oh, you have belief, and we have belief. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that excellent? We can all just believe. You stay there and believe what you believe, and we'll stay up here and believe what we believe, but let's just not talk. Okay, and so if we stay on the beach, well, we accomplish nothing. But I warned you that the commander of that resistance nest is a tough guy, hard as steel, who wants to convince you that all you have is belief. And so we looked at how we don't just have mere belief, but we have actual knowledge for what we believe. But still, that's a pretty soft target. It's formidable, make no mistake, but it's squishy. It's nerfy. The one we're going to talk about tonight is as hard as diamonds, as cold as steel, and very, very old. Some of those soldiers who stormed that beach on that foggy June 6th morning, 1944, at 6:30 a.m., some of them knew what they would be facing, and they were understandably scared. Others who are just the kind of person who never quite get it, whether they be stepping into actual combat or stepping into the spiritual battle that we read about in 2 Corinthians 10, they just never stop and think about it. And these are the folks who go off to ministry, whether it be a day in Scranton. Thank you for that, by the way. I live there. It is the valley of the shadow of death, so thank you. I'm not kidding. That sign that you passed on your way in that says Scranton welcomes you, I want to replace that with abandon all hope, ye who enter here. But we'll have to save that for another time. But we go off to a day or a lifetime of ministry, kind of skipping down the yellow brick road, holding hands and singing Little Lambs for Jesus, until we start seeing the carnage all around us. And just like on that foggy June morning, where those soldiers had to deal with a combination of the stench of fumes, rocket fuel, machine gun, gunpowder, vomit, sweat, and death. You see the destruction all around you. And the resistance nest that we're going to talk about tonight is called this. It is called the logical problem of evil. The logical problem of evil. Now, I have studied it. I'm going to do my best to explain it to you. You're going to have to work hard to think through some of these concepts, because it would not surprise me if some of them are new. But I will tell you that this very issue is one that gets skipped over and gets padded and gets swept under the rug. And this is the kind of thing where somebody will come up to you, and I'll explain what all this is here in a minute, but this is the thing where someone says, you just need to believe. And they don't deal with the issue. So we're going to do our best to deal with this issue. But this resistance nest that we're talking about tonight is very hard. This is the one as we are stepping into combat and we're watching our fellow soldiers fall all around us, maimed beyond recognition. And I don't mean physically. I'm talking about the spiritual and emotional scars that some people that we know have experienced. Do you know what I'm speaking of? If you do not, you will. There will come a time in your life when you're going to face suffering. The slide that I had right up before that, let's see if I can go back. Will work? Oh, hooray. All these books that are written up here are written by atheists. Some of them are deconversion stories, like down on the bottom in the middle says, Why I Became an Atheist. On the top, just one over on the top, Godless. Those books are written by men who were pastors. They are now atheists, studying at well-known conservative theological seminaries. If you want to know their stories, come ask me. I've read all of those, and I'm happy to talk to you about that. But there's a theme that runs through those stories about these in this case, men who have given up on their relationship with God. And it is the core of this resistance nest, and it is this. If there is suffering in this world that you cannot figure out, if your life is full of disillusionment, despair, and destruction, if you are watching your fellow soldiers fall all around you without explanation, and it seems like there's just a senseless destruction and death, then there is no God. This is the resistance nest we're going to talk about. They are fearless, they are mean, they are brutal, and they are ugly. The forces that are behind those walls. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is a fortress, as 2 Corinthians 10 says, we must take if we're going to get in country and occupy until Jesus comes. So this idea of unnecessary suffering is all over the place. It is a theme that pops up everywhere. A very recent film that dealt with this is the movie Silence. Did anybody see this in this room? By the way, this is my little disclaimer. I shouldn't have to do this, but I'm going to. Just because I talk about certain books or movies doesn't mean I think they're the greatest thing ever. So can we be clear on that? Okay, because this is rated R. It's gory, just so you know. But this movie that was directed by Martin Scorsese, who, by the way, if you know anything about Martin Scorsese films, he loves the Judas Iscariot character. So, Christy, I don't know if you're here, but there you are. He loves Judas Iscariot. He has a Judas in every film. And again, as a graduate of this fine institution, I cannot recommend them. I'm just saying I might know what's in the movies. So this film has a Judas character, and the film is based on a book of the same name, and the book is written by a Catholic Japanese man. His name is Shusaku Endo. Shusaku Endo wrote historic literature dealing with something regarding the Catholic faith in Japan, and this book is a piece of religious history in Japan. Let me tell you what it's about, because I saw like 1.5 hands go up. I didn't think many of you saw this. This movie was in the theaters around here for about 2 weeks, and that was it, even though it's got a big name director. So here's the story. Mel mentioned to you that I teach at the University of Scranton, which is a Catholic Jesuit school. The Jesuits are a group of brothers of Catholic priests founded in the late 16th century by Ignatius of Loyola. He was an old Spanish soldier, had a pretty significant conversion experience, and he and I believe 3 others formed this brotherhood called the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits as they're known, and they began immediately spreading the gospel throughout the world. It was one of the 4 original Jesuit brothers who was the first Western person to bring the gospel to the shores of Japan in the late 16th century. That's the 1500s, y'all, just so we know what we're talking about here. And Christianity in Japan exploded. into the early 17th century. There are some estimates that there were as many as 500,000 Christians in Japan. I do not think there are that many today. They built schools, hospitals, aid stations. They brought to the people what they needed. And Japan was a country that was not a nation, but was just a collection of similar clans of people who shared a similar language and background, and they were very open to the gospel. And then in the 17th century, early 17th century, one particular shogun beat all the other clans, and he brought them together, and he consolidated power. And at this time in Japan, there was a trade war between Portugal, England, and the Dutch and English were represented as Protestant nations, Portugal as a Catholic nation, and they convinced this guy, the Dutch and the English, that he needed to kick out all the Portuguese and all the Catholics and all the missionaries with them. Basically, he needed to eradicate Christianity. This man, by himself, personally crucified a bunch of people in one day. And after that one day, he unleashed hell on the Christians in Japan. This is the true story. To the point where you had to denounce Christ, and you had to do so annually. And what they would do is each village would have this little brass disc that would be in the ground, and on that brass disc would be the image of the face of Jesus or Mary. And what you had to do every year is you had to come and you had to stomp on it every year. You had to stomp on the face of Jesus to demonstrate that you had given him up. If you did not, the torture that you would endure would be unspeakable. In this story, it's about two young Jesuit priests played by Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver, FYI, Spider-Man, Kylo Ren, just saying. And there are these two young Portuguese Jesuit priests, and they hear that their mentor, played by Liam Neeson, Aslan, has... So you got Spider-Man, Kylo Ren, Aslan, one movie. Would that not be awesome? Please, Disney, buy the rights to that. I will go see it. And knowing Disney, they probably would. So they hear that their great teacher and mentor, played by Liam Neeson, has apostatized. He's given up his faith in Christ, and he has become a Japanese, taken a wife. If you know anything about Jesuit priests, they don't get married. And they don't believe it. And so they get permission from the Catholic Church to sneak into Japan to see what has happened to their teacher. And that's just the beginning of the story. They get there, and the horrid conditions that they find believers in and what they have to suffer themselves is incredible. And I'm not going to ruin the movie for you, but I will tell you the name Silence means the silence of God in the face of suffering. That's what it means in the book and the movie. Another book that it wouldn't surprise me if more of you are familiar with is Night by Elie Wiesel. Anybody have to read that? Yes, far more hands. And I'm glad I've never seen this movie. But I have read the book written in 1960 by a Holocaust survivor, Elie Wiesel, a Hungarian Jew, who tells a story about how he and the other Jews in Hungary believed that they would be safe from the atrocities of World War II. Hungary was a nation that said that they were going to remain neutral, and they were one of the last European nations that were able to keep their neutrality. And it was just a question of when is the Soviet army going to get here to protect us from the Germans? And so Elie Wiesel grew up in this Jewish village with his family. They could hear the guns of the artillery off in the distance, and they kept thinking, we're going to be safe. The Soviet army is going to get here. Everything's going to be fine. They were wrong. The Germans got there first. And the Germans got there, and they started building ghettos. And they started herding all the Jews into ghettos. By the way, the word ghetto is a word you should never use to describe your house, car, or clothes. Banish it from your lexicon if that's a word that you use. Don't do it. So they started herding them into ghettos, and Wiesel and his family thought, oh, they're doing this for our safety, to keep us away from the combat. They thought that the very same day that they were taken out of the ghettos and they were packed onto cattle cars in the heat of summer, and they were shipped off to Poland. And they're packed so tightly in these cattle cars, and the conditions are so awful, Wiesel writes, that when they got off the cars, it was so bad and the stench was so horrible, they didn't realize that people had died standing up. And they fell over as they exited this car. And they still thought the Nazis are taking us out of our town for our safety. All illusion was destroyed when they were walked up to what they would later find out to be a death camp. Wiesel and his father were separated Wiesel and his father were separated from his mother and sister. He never saw them again. And as they were marched into a camp, they saw that the Nazi guards at this camp had just hung a 12-year-old boy from the crossbeam over the gate. And they didn't do it correctly, and he hung there swinging in the wind, strangling for hours, dying. And Wiesel looked up at that, and he said this and wrote it in his book, "Where is God? Where is God?" God is hanging on that noose. Elie Wiesel basically abandoned his faith, and frankly, who could blame him? If you survived the atrocities of a Nazi death camp, where would your faith be? Could you conjure up what you really need to believe then? Could you just say, I just need to believe more, doubt less? Good luck with that. Christian philosopher Douglas Groothuis, in his tome Christian Apologetics, wrote this: in the smothering grip of evil, and you may also include in the word evil suffering, despair, disillusionment. In the smothering grip of evil, humans also turn on heaven. It does not say they turn to heaven. It says they turn on heaven. The wounded often move from questions to accusations, from accusations to rebellion, and from rebellion to disbelief. Read that with me one more time. In the smothering grip of evil, humans also turn on heaven. The wounded often move from questions to accusations to rebellion, and from rebellion to disbelief. Now, lest you think that this is a guy writing from an ivory tower who knows nothing about suffering, just this past Friday, his wife died of a rare form of dementia. I'm friends with him on Facebook, and I've followed their journey for the past few years. He knows what suffering is. So if we're going to understand how we're going to defeat this particular resistance nest, we need to know what we're dealing with. We need to do some research on the enemy. We need to make sure that we're approaching it with the right weapons, that they are sharpened, loaded, locked and loaded, whatever metaphor you like, so that we can do what we have to do. So we're going to have to ask a question. Well, what exactly is evil? What do we mean by that? And I'm going to give you a full explanation of the logical problem of evil. That's one of the things I'm going to try to cover in the time I have left. And so just hang on, we're getting there. But let's talk about what is evil. Well, there's two kinds. There's two kinds of evil. There's natural evil, and these are things like tornadoes, earthquakes, tidal waves, hurricanes, floods, diseases, deformities. Okay? These are just kind of things that just happen, right? We might want to say they're accidents. But when these things happen, they are terrible. And it's part of the fallen nature of the universe. That is why these things happen. But interestingly, when these things happen, often what follows is human evil. And it can come from the knife, the bomb, the gun, the pen, and tongue. Basically, that list of stuff also are tools, but they can be tools used to harm and not to do good. Lies, murder, theft, cruelty, malice, all follow. All follow. All of these things are considered evil. So whether it be that you go to the hospital for your friends who just had their newborn baby, and as you walk in and you haven't been miraculously on social media that day, you do not know that the baby was born, but born with some very difficult issues, and you walk in and you just look down and you know something is not right. And your heart breaks. As many of us watched as those boys and their coach were trapped in the cave for days, we held our breath knowing they must get out, and it would just simply be wrong, evil for them to die in that place. What good would that be? Right? Here's the reality. If this is going to be a stronghold that we as a community of Christ followers are going to defeat with the divine weapons forged in heaven, there's something that we need to know about it. If we put a candy coating on it, if we try to ignore it, if we try to sidestep it, if we try just not to do anything about it, we're really missing a point. But we need to be brutally honest with this particular enemy, and here's what I need you to know. The problem of evil, is the best argument against Christianity. Yes, you read that correctly. One of the things that we must have if we're going to be effective in this world for the cause of Jesus Christ, that is intellectual integrity. That means we need to be honest. And if we say, no, there is actually no argument that makes sense that can stand up to Christianity, that's actually not true. Because the problem of evil is a good one. If I were to take a simple poll, and I'm not going to do this, you may think about it rhetorically, but if I were to take a poll among you to ask you, how many of you know somebody who has walked away from either A, church, or B, their faith altogether because of some terrible thing that has happened in their lives, I wonder how many of your hands would go up. I know those of you in this room who are closer to my age than farther away, all of you know what I am talking about. You know that family who's had a child die. You know that young mother who had the husband walk away. You know that couple who watched their child suffer and die. You know those people who have been around very difficult circumstances. Again, if you want to see it, go join a Mission Scranton team. You will see it. Week after week, suffering. And there are people who say that and say, if there is this kind of suffering, there is no God. I'm going to stay on the beach. Maybe I can enjoy my belief with a bunch of other people who happen to agree with me, but at the end of the day, it's not going to mean anything. And so this is one of the best arguments. Again, that list of books I showed you, a common theme of those who abandon their faith is something horrible has happened to them. Sometimes it's their own fault in those books, but they still say, if these horrible things happen and I beg God for an answer and I demand to know what is happening and he gives me nothing, he is not real. You've heard the stories, haven't you? The good news is, it is not the end. This is not the end of the story. And I will be honest, and I'm not trying to just use words to try to puff it up, but this is a formidable obstacle that needs to be defeated, a sizable resistance nest, but it is not insurmountable. We just need to stop and think. All right, so let's talk about where this problem of evil thing came from. Is it new? Nope, it's wicked old. In fact, this old, dead, moldy curtain wearer over here, Epicurus, with a sweet beard, FYI. I'm a little jealous of that. That's kind of nice. I'm getting there. In a book that he wrote called De Ira Dei, or On the Anger of the Gods. Now, before you read that, it's confusing, so just wait for me. Hold on. Epicurus, that dude, is the founder of an ancient school of thought called Epicureanism. Right? It's been around for a long time. They're still with us today. You can actually read a little bit about Epicureanism in the Bible, particularly in places like Acts 17. When Paul is at Athens, his layover on the way to Corinth, and there's no church there, and he's in the marketplace, the Walmart of the day, talking about the good news of the resurrection of Jesus. It says that a group of Stoic and Epicurean philosophers take issue with what Paul's saying. It says some are saying, what is this babbler trying to say? And it says others say that he's advocating foreign gods. Well, that's the same group of people. Epicurus founded Epicureanism. Epicureanism did not believe in God, or gods, plural. They kind of talked about it, but the Epicureans, this is important, the Epicureans believed that everything, all of reality, is material, physical, matter. Even your soul is made up of very tiny particles that when you die kind of dissolve and go back into this like matrix-looking cascade, and depending on how things stick together or repel from one another makes everything. You, the chair you're sitting on, everything. So when he writes a book on the anger of the gods, he's kind of like winking and saying, not really. All right? Okay, so now let's get confused and try to read what he said. So here's what he says: God either wishes to take away evils and is unable, or he is able and unwilling, or he is neither willing nor able, or he is both willing and able. What? I'm glad you asked. Um, because I'm going to explain it to you. Now, do you see the year he died? Okay, so some math whiz, tell me roughly how many years before the time of Christ is this? Thank you. That's better than roughly, right? So 270, 300 years-ish before the time of Christ. So is this recent or ancient? Right, this is old. All right, so here, let me explain what Epicurus is trying to do. Atheists today, those who are manning the resistance nest called evil, are using the very same arguments that were used over 2,300 years ago. They don't have any new material. They're using the same thing, but here's how it goes. What Epicurus is doing in that wicked, confusing quote, and by the way, if you really want that, see me and I'll send it to you so you can have it. He kind of sees belief in God as a stool with three legs. Are you following me? Kind of sees belief in God as a stool with three legs. And if you can kick out any one of those legs, what's going to happen to the stool? It's going to fall over, right? So Epicurus understands something very important about belief in God, or what we would call theism. Theos, Greek word for God. Belief in God, theism. Are you with me? As opposed to atheism. He understands something very important. So if you're taking notes and you're trying to follow along and you're daring to think, this is really important for you to get. He understands that any conversation about God, any serious conversation about God, whether the God I claim as my hope and that you claim as your hope, or any other God, any serious conversation about any of that must be logically coherent. In other words, it has to at least make sense. Perhaps some of you have heard a term people have used before. Well, I believe in God just as much as I believe in the flying spaghetti monster. Anybody ever heard the term flying spaghetti monster? I know, it's really ridiculous. There is absolutely no way to have a logical conversation about something called a flying spaghetti monster. Okay? However, you can have a logical conversation about God, and Epicurus knows this. So he's not going to make up some kind of goofy claim about God that most of us would just go, well, not only are you wrong, but you're a moron. He's not going to do that. So let me explain the three legs of the stool, and you tell me if this is brilliant or not. Are you ready? First thing he says is this, and here's what he's getting at in that talk, in that little quote. Maybe God is willing to make sure that no one suffers. So the whole thing we're talking about is unnecessary suffering. By the way, the Epicureans thought that suffering was the ultimate killjoy. They were the people who wanted to party their faces off. So if they had a theme, it would be this: toga, right? So they just wanted to party all the time. If they had a t-shirt, it would say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Red Solo cup, fill me up. So that's the kind of thing that they would do, right? So they didn't want any kind of suffering. So they'd say any unnecessary suffering, there's got to be an issue with that. So they'd say, well, maybe God really wants to do something. Maybe he's looking down on heaven and going, oh man, that's really messed up. There's children suffering. There's husbands and wives that are cheating on each other. They're beating their kids. There's diseases. There's car accidents. There's all kinds of horrible poverty in the world, and hunger, and all kinds of destruction. Man, I really want to do something about it, but I can't. Well, if that's the case, what gets called then into question is the character quality that necessarily God must have, which is omnipotence, all power. Omnipotence, all powerful. Makes sense, right? Okay? So that's the first one. Second one. Well, maybe he is able, but but if he's able and unwilling, then maybe he's cruel, which is not in accord with his character, which calls into question his omnibenevolence or all loving. Is God love according to the definition of God in Scripture? Hello? Is God love according to the definition of God in Scripture? Yes. Is God all powerful according to the descriptions of God in Scripture? Yes. So he's saying, well, maybe he wants to, or maybe he can and is unwilling. Well, he's just mean. Yeah, I could do something about that, but go ahead. You just go on and suffer. Ah, he's like, hey, angels, look at the mess they got themselves into today, and they're eating popcorn. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Look at how the humans are screwed up their lives. That's not very nice, right? So he's calling into question his all-powerful nature, his all-loving nature, or number three, if he is unaware of suffering, then he is unknowing, which is not in accord with his character or his omniscience. Is a biblical view of God that he is all-powerful? Yes. That he is all-loving? Yes. And that he knows everything? Yes. So maybe, according to Epicurus, and I'm just laying out for you, I'm laying out for you the argument here. Epicurus is saying, well, maybe he's just not powerful enough. Is that your God? Look at your life. Look at how people have suffered unnecessarily. Well, maybe he can't do it, or maybe he just doesn't care. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, he is God, after all. He's got a whole universe to deal with. Who are you? What do you stinking do? Or maybe he just doesn't know. Maybe he's up playing canasta with, the other angels. Hey, God, are you aware that there's a problem in the universe? What? No. I didn't know. So Epicurus is very sly. This is brilliant. And as I understand it, he is addressing the Hebrew God. Did Christianity exist in 270 BC? No. Judaism certainly did. And so he's addressing Judaism, and he's basically making the Jewish community is like, so pick one. Which is it? Is your God not all-powerful, not all-loving, or not all-knowing? Which one is it? So in my own life, I've had to deal with this. A little over 3 years ago, my mother-in-law was diagnosed with cancer, and she died a day short of 3 weeks later. And no one ever, couples, well, I wouldn't say ever, but normal couples don't sit around like trying to figure out which one of our parents is going to die first. In hindsight, we never thought it would have been her. And we could not figure out why this happened. And as I'm trying to occupy until Jesus comes, the the shots kept coming from the resistance nest of evil, peppering me with these questions. So which is it, Andy? Because you asked God to save her, didn't you? Oh, so many times. I begged God to spare her. I've been a pastor and I've buried several people. I've never seen anything like that. It's terrible. I begged God to spare her because you know what? She didn't deserve it. I really don't know many people that would say, yeah, you deserve that kind of cancer to suffer and die, please. But of all people, I couldn't see that. And so the argument that the enemy has been using, that mighty artillery cannon that he's been firing down on God's chosen us for centuries, he still uses today. So what do we do about it? Because it is formidable, but it is not the end. Well, what we need to do is we need to think about the origin of nature and evil. So there's a few pieces to this. First of all, unlike most religions, including Eastern forms of religion and atheism, the Bible affirms that God created everything out of nothing and declared it good. Nowhere in the recording of the 6-day week of creation In the opening pages of your Bible, does it say, and then on the half day, between the third and the fourth day, God got bored and made something that he called evil. Look at what I have made. No, it says that everything that he made was good, and at the end of the sixth day, after the pinnacle of his creation, which is humanity, the thing to which he gave part of himself, the imago Dei, the image of God, God stepped back, look at all that he made, and he said, it is very good. Last year, when I was here at this event, I spoke a series from the book of Daniel, and I had immersed myself in ancient Babylonian religion. It was really weird, but I wanted to understand what Daniel and his friends stepped into when they were in captivity in Babylon. And I studied Babylonian religion, and I saw a theme that I also learned when I studied what the ancient Greeks believed, because I have a background in that. And I've seen it over and over again, that all these other religions, just like this point tells you, they see that the gods, however they made stuff, which is a whole other story, but they always made man flawed on purpose. The Bible says that God made man perfectly, and everything else, he made everything good. Is the God that you serve the God that makes defective material on purpose? All of creation is valuable to God. The universe has structure and purpose. You can read about that in Proverbs chapter 8. God gave man moral responsibility and told him how to live. God gave man moral responsibility and told him how to live. This is a question that comes up in my both my theology and my philosophy classes quite a bit. The question is this: Andy, couldn't God have created a universe where evil was not possible? The answer is yes. Well, the question then is, well, why didn't he do that? Right? Would you agree with me that's reasonable? Yes? Remember we talked a little bit about some of the attributes or the essence of God. One of them is God is love. Correct? So would it be fair to say that God had a love relationship with the pinnacle, particularly of its creation, Adam and Eve? Can you make someone love you? Right now there's some like ninth grade boy going, I tried. She's just not into me. And they're going, ooh, I'm taking notes now. He's going to tell us how to make somebody love me. Sorry. That's the very definition of what love is. Is it not? Therefore, if you're going to be in love with anyone, and I don't mean necessarily romantically, to be in love means you love someone and they love you. Like your mom. Okay? It's weird to say, I'm in love with my mom. I wouldn't say that out loud either. Word. It's weird. But if you have that love relationship, they have to be free to betray you. Do you understand that? There has to be the freedom for them to walk away. That is why God gave them moral responsibility. Adam and Eve, huddle up. Got some instruction for you. This is the Giessman translation, FYI. Huddle up. I got some instructions for you. See this garden? Pretty awesome, right? Those of us who, when we go through a buffet, our plates have that brown color palette. Like Chris Brown guilted me into eating green beans tonight. I didn't want to do that, but he made me because I was happy to have a brown palette on my plate. Even we would find something to eat in that wonderful garden, right? Probably had fruit, tasted like steak. I don't know. I made that up. But God said, huddle up. You can eat anything except you may not eat from the tree of knowledge and good and evil. The day you eat of it, you will surely die. That, friends, is God giving the pinnacle of his creation moral responsibility. Why? Because he's a God of love. Not a God who builds automatons or robots. The fall. Christianity claims that vice and evil are not natural to man. There is nothing natural about evil being part of who we are. Now, I understand that we use that in regular everyday language. Well, it's just natural. It's a natural tendency to stretch the truth. It's a natural tendency to want to take something that doesn't belong for us. I understand that, and I'm not mad at you. I'm not judging you if you use that language. But technically, so hashtag philosopher probs, technically speaking, as we read Genesis 1:31, there's absolutely nothing natural about evil residing in us. It doesn't belong there. Genesis chapter 3, humans change themselves by rebelling against God. The moment that Adam, not Eve, mind you, Adam bit into that fruit, whatever it was, the moment he bit into that fruit, they recognized, oh no. And what do? They go trucking off into the woods, and they make clothes for themselves because they realize they're naked. And then God shows up, he says, who said you were naked? Well, we got some bad fruit. I'm aware. What have you done? And from that moment forward, humanity has been changed. Another part of the fall. Now, this is huge, and I'm going to need you to stay with me here for a couple minutes as we talk about this issue, because there's big words in here I'm going to have to explain, I think. Evil is not metaphysically necessary. So, again, as part of my regular discussion in the courses that I teach, I ask my students, why is there evil? Why is it necessary? I want you to think about it in your own mind. In fact, if you want to jot down an initial answer that you can wrestle with later, great. If your answer is something like, well, I must have evil in order to know what is good, you have that backwards. You do not need evil to know what is good. If you do, then that means it's metaphysically necessary. What does metaphysical mean? Glad you asked. Something that is metaphysical is something that is real, that is not material. How many of you in this room have a soul? Okay, Pastor Jeff is soulless. You need to pray for him, right? So for those of us who have a soul, Pastor Jeff, soul is real, right? Okay, but is it material or immaterial? It's or spiritual, right? It's material, spiritual. It's spiritual, immaterial. You can use that word interchangeably. Okay, so it's real, but it's not physical. So is good something physical? No. It's real, but it's there. It's kind of like justice, mercy, love. Now, if I asked you to give me a definition of any of those things, you'd probably give me illustrations of what you know to be love, or what you know to be good, or what you know to be just, correct? But that's not what the thing is. So evil is not metaphysically necessary. It doesn't have to be. Evil is actually dependent upon a prior goodness. Any J.R.R. Tolkien fans in the room? Okay, so in Tolkien's world, particularly in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, he captures a very biblical idea of what evil is. And also the ancient theologian Augustine, not Augustine. Augustine is a city in Florida. Augustine, right? So they had this idea of the privation view. In Tolkien's world, all evil things were at one time good. Think about it. Including Sauron himself, for those of you nerd power, right? All evil things were at one time good. Now, that doesn't mean that all evil things can be redeemed. Satan himself cannot be redeemed, but Satan was at one time. Do you know what that means? There is no such thing as pure evil. And, some of you are like, you have not met my little sister. Okay. Granted. But there is no such thing as pure evil. This is good news. It's a parasite. The only way evil can exist if it has a host. Redemption. God planned a way to purchase back all of creation immediately after the fall. Genesis 3:15. Immediately after the fall, God says, all right, huddle up again. We got a problem here. What's going on? And Adam's like, the woman gave me the fruit. Men have been doing that for thousands of years now. It's the chick's fault, right? And Eve's like, no, it's a talking snake, which should have been my first clue. Actually, when you think about it, I think lots of animals talked. And he's like, Dr. Doolittle, woo! So they're all talking to the animals. So it's not like, oh, there's a talking snake? That's not right. I think it was normal. We'll have to save that. So she blames the snake. God's like, all right, shut it. I warned you. You had one job. And you failed. From dust you came, to dust you will return. You're now going to have to eke out a survival from the earth by the sweat of your brow. It's going to literally kill you. Eve, you and your seed, you're going to have pain in childbirth. You, serpent, you lose your legs. Bam! Ugh! So down he goes. And by the way, pal, from her line is going to come one who's going to crush you. Oh, you will hurt him. Yeah, you will bruise his heel. He will crush your head. In the very beginning, at the very Genesis itself of evil among humanity, God says, I am dissatisfied to allow the pinnacle of my creation to spiral off into darkness. I, through my creation, am going to provide an answer for you. And then as we learn, as God demonstrates his faithfulness throughout Scripture, we get all the way up to John chapter 3, and as Jesus has this conversation with Nicodemus, he says to him, listen, for God so loved that is a Greek word, cosmos, universe, all of it. He's going to save it through me. I am the serpent crusher, the Giessman translation. He continued to reveal himself in nature, Israel, and culminated in the incarnation of Jesus of Nazareth, John 1, Hebrews 1, 1 through 3. There are cumulative arguments for God's existence. So even though this is the best argument against the existence of God, again, it is not insurmountable, and there's something we can do. There's a whole list of arguments for God's existence. We're going to cover one of these tomorrow. There's a cosmological argument asking, why is there something rather than nothing? Where did the something come from? The moral argument, how in the world do we know the difference between right and wrong? If all we are is a product of a massive protoplasm, we have no explanation for knowing what evil even is. Or the fine-tuning argument, why in the world is there one planet among billions that can support life? All of these are cumulative in their arguments for the existence of God. One thing, no matter how strong it is, this resistance nest does not take down all of these others. For time's sake, I am going to skip that. All right. I've seen some phones being hoisted. If anybody wants this, you just let me know and I'll gladly send it to you. So let's talk about this for a second. We need to talk about the difference between God's sovereignty and free will. So there's this idea that man has absolute free will, or the fancy theological, philosophical term for it is libertarianism. That has nothing to do with Rand Paul, for those of you who are into politics. There's this idea of absolute free will, that man can do whatever he wants. But then there's this idea of God's sovereignty, where God is totally in control. And so there are people who would say, no, it's man's free will, and it's only man where evil comes from. And then other people say, no, man can't create anything. God is totally sovereign, so God must have created evil. Time out. There's a compatibility issue here. Yes, God is totally in control. If he is indeed the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end, you can't get outside of that. Am I right? So within that, God gives humanity a giant backyard called free will. Don't step out of the backyard. which is exactly what Adam did. So God is sovereign, man is free. Both are in accord with God's character. There's no problem. Now, to try to figure out what evil is, there's a couple, and how to deal with it. So some of the weapons to try to get close as we sneak up to the barbed wire, and we throw the explosives under there to blow it up, and we have clear lines of fire so that we can get at the enemy, we can get over this thing and get to the mission and start seeing people coming to Jesus. So there's some things that we need to think about. So one is called the greater good, which says evil is not gratuitous. Do you guys know what a gratuity is? How many of you have ever served as a server in a restaurant? You know what a gratuity is, do you not? Also known as a tip. Now, it's kind of interesting when you have a party of 8 or more, a gratuity has already been added. That cracks me up. Again, hashtag philosopher probs. Because gratuity literally means you get to decide what the value is. And they're saying, no, we've decided what the value is. But that's not gratuitous. So that's right. Don't try to have that argument with a manager. It's just dumb. So what this is saying is that evil isn't just like floating out there meaningless. It's that God will use it to accomplish his plan. He can't be thwarted. So it's not like after Adam rebels against God, because God is loving in his character and he has to give people an opportunity if they want to rebel. He has to. That's part of a loving relationship. And Adam took the bait and he did exactly what the enemy wanted, and they both fell in, Adam and Eve, and they rebelled against God. And so here we are with natural evil, with moral evil, and sometimes, a lot of times, they often go together. And it's not like every time that happens, God's like, oh no, I got to come up with a new plan. If God is who he says he is, his plan cannot be taken down. It can't. It's impossible. And the classic example of that is Joseph and his brothers. Genesis chapter 50. Joseph, sold into slavery, rises to a very high position in the Egyptian empire, ends up becoming the lifeline for his starving brothers. And as they come back to him, I don't have time to go through the whole story, as they come back to him, quaking in fear for their own lives, he reveals himself to them as his brother. Because I don't know if you know this, but man, in ancient Egypt, they used a lot of makeup. They used a lot of product. So that's why they didn't recognize him. Sorry, just the way it goes. So once he finally reveals himself, they're like, we told our father that you got killed by a wild animal, and we sold you to gypsies, and we didn't get much money for it. That stinks. Joseph's like, I know, right? For realsies. You guys. It's been a long time. I'm wearing makeup now because of all y'all. But what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Back up. However, this is not the same as silver lining theology. Silver lining theology is dangerous and incomplete. Silver lining theology says, well, I have this terrible thing happening to me, and I'm going to just go all Romans 8, because all things work together for good, so I'm going to find the good in this situation. When I do, that is going to help me trust in God. Well, here's the thing. Sometimes God is gracious and he lets you see that, does he not? He is under no obligation to do so. Count yourself blessed. To this day, ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to share something with you very personal. To this day, I cannot tell you the good that has come out of my mother-in-law's suffering and death. My father-in-law, who has no chance of listening to this, he's off the grid entirely, has become a recluse. He hasn't left the house in over 3 years. Stopped taking his medications, won't go to the doctor. He's an old man. Spiraling in depression. You want to tell me I'm going to find the silver lining in that? I don't think so. And if you want an example of those who demanded an answer for God, I suggest you read about his servant Job. If you want to go chapter after chapter with God and him lighten India, go ahead. No, thank you. I need to back up here for a second. Time out. Remember how we talked about why does evil exist? And I told you that a lot of, at least my students, and a lot of Christians that I meet will say that we need evil in order to know what is good. Remember that? Okay, I know it's ancient history. It's like 10 minutes ago, but you guys remember that? I want to just follow that out to its logical conclusion. If that's true, you should want to be a lung cancer survivor. Why? So that you know the goodness of breathing fresh air. You should want to be in an abusive relationship so that you know what nurture really feels like. Again, let me be really personal with you. And I feel like a doofus because I'm the only speaker who hasn't showed a picture of my wife and kids. So I'm going to fix that for next week. We have 2 children at home, Sean and Olivia. Sean is 9, Olivia is 8. They're a year and 2 days apart. Their birthdays are in December. God help us. And then my birthday is January 3rd, and that's like the ultimate, year. They are not our natural children. We adopted them just a few years ago. We were foster parents through the county, Lackawanna County. My son, Sean, has never spoken about his parents, and they know them. We just adopted them in November of 2015, so we're not even 3 years that we adopted them. Pretty much right up until just a month or 2 before that, they were having regular visits with both their parents separately. So they indeed know their parents. He's never said a word. That scares me. Olivia, who's my little drama queen, will sit on her bed with her scrapbook that the adoption agency made for her with some memories of her mom and dad, weeping, wailing, looking at a grainy bubble jet printed picture of her mom and dad, a locket of her mom's hair, a few notes that were jotted down, suffering the loss of her parents. Now, friends, I'll be the first to admit to you, those kids are better off with us. If you think that's arrogant, I don't care. I don't care. They're better off with us. Absolutely. But you know what would be even better yet? If they never had to know our names. If it was their mom and dad going to their piano recital. If it was their biological grandparents who went to their little dumb concerts at their school. If it was their aunts and uncles who beamed with pride when their niece and nephew received simple little trophies at their piano recital. That is good. What is evil is that they had to be taken away in the first place. Do not buy the lie that the world sells that in order for you to know good, you must first know evil. That is godless. It is from the pit of hell. It must be banished from your thinking. No one who's going to storm that resistance nest has that mindset. Kill it. Now. Okay, time in. No other religion teaches of a suffering, dying, and resurrected Messiah. Every other religion says that you must suffer in order to get what you want. Probably in this life, certainly in the next, but there's nothing that is just given to you. You must earn it, and you must earn it through work, and you must earn it through suffering. Christianity says no, that God came to us. He doesn't expect us to come to Him, dragging all of our burden, dragging all of our disease, dragging the stench of death, but God stepped into the death and He said, I will give you life. You show me another major religion or minor one on the planet that's even close. The cross was the single greatest triumph of good over evil. No other founder cried out at his death, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In those 6 hours on that Friday, as Jesus was nailed to that cross, humiliated, naked, bleeding, beaten beyond recognition, mutilated, being murdered to accept your sin and mine, to pay the penalty we could never pay, even the Father turns his back on the Son. Why? Because he takes all that evil onto himself. And do you know where it stayed? Nailed to the cross. Death was not the end. If death could not hold him, if we have every reason to trust him, he is the beginning and the end. Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, 52 through 57. "The trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, the mortal with immortality. When the perishable has been clothed with imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God. He gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." What a glorious victory shout. Those who are in the resistance nest of evil say, "Our victory shout will be your cries of destruction and the lamentations of your women," or something stupid like that. But Jesus, as we are told about in the Gospels, is written about by his servants, like Paul says, no. Here's our victory cry. It's a question. "Oh, death, where is your sting?" The pinnacle of evil is death. The pinnacle of good defeating evil is death, but it doesn't end in death. It ends in resurrection. I'm going to ask Rise to come back up as we get ready to close, and you guys can start playing something plaintively immediately as you get up here. So, two possibilities. We're talking in my workshop where we're working hard at melting down our brains every day. We're continuing some of the conversations that you and I are having together, and we're talking about objective truth. Now, an objective truth, just to recap from yesterday morning, means something that is either true or false, and it is either true or false for everybody. That doesn't mean it gets to be false for you and true for me. It's kind of like 2 + 2 is 4. And it's 4 for you just as much as it is for me. Okay? So the end result, there's just two ways of looking at this. It comes from the laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot both be and not be at the same time in the same way. It either is or it is not. So here it is. 1, God is who he claims to be and has accomplished what he said. Evil has an answer. Side A. Flip it over. The other side is, sometimes God just doesn't really care. No. It's not halfway. It's one or the other. Or God is a myth, Jesus was a liar, and you and I are mired in the bog of hopelessness. Which one? It's not a choice. It is either one way or the other. Which is it? I'm pretty sure the evidence points towards side A. Now here's the thing. We're going to sing a song. We're going to close. So right now, it's that time. Bow your heads, close your eyes. You got to come up with a new way of saying that, because I've been saying that the same way for 20 years. It's getting old. I just don't know what else to do. I want to give you an opportunity to respond. And you're like, respond to what? Well, that's an excellent question. I'm not going to ask you to say, well, suffering isn't real, because that's clearly not the case. Jesus suffered and died. He was tempted in all ways like we are, yet was without sin. He knows what it's like to go without food. He knows what it's like to have his friends betray him. He knows what it's like to watch his friends die. He knows. The writer of that great theological treatise, the book of Hebrews, says, we do not serve a high priest who doesn't understand our suffering. He knows. It's real. This isn't some kind of Eastern religion that says evil is a no thing. No. Christianity acknowledges its reality and answers its question. So I'm not asking you to say, no, evil's not going to bother me anymore. The complete opposite. There might be people here in this room who have been so caught up in the sufferings of your life, maybe because of decisions you have made, unwise, ungodly, unbiblical. The simple word is sin. And your identity has been wrapped up in trying to fill in the gaps and the cracks and the chasms of your heart. Or you're just a person who, whether it's your own suffering or someone else's, you're just looking around you and it's become your identity. And you've forgotten, no, I am a child of the King. He who suffered all things for me. I call upon his name and I throw myself at his mercy and I beg his name for help. Perhaps you have forgotten who you are. You have forgotten your birthright. You have forgotten your destiny. You have forgotten your heritage. As we sing, if you're ready to storm the resistance nest, not just for you, but for a world that is suffering, I'm going to ask you to just come forward and talk to God. Make it public. And we will then end with prayer.